Jesse James was born on the 5th of September of 1847. Jesse James was born in a family of farmers and slave owners in Canary, Missouri. Jesse James' father was a well-educated man and Baptist born in Kentucky. He was one of the earliest founders of William Joel College. Jesse James' mom, Zerelda James, was also born in Kentucky and was taken in by her grandfather who owned a saloon. Jesse James growing up was really close with his older brother Frank. Frank was 4 years older than Jesse, and later tensions between the North and the South started to emerge because of the views on slavery. This erupted into the Civil War that began in 1861. When the Civil War started, Jesse's older brother Frank chose to fight for the Confederacy at 17 years old. Jesse, being 13, would not fulfill the requirements, so he stayed with his family until 1864 when he joined the Bushwhackers. The Bushwhackers were known for the guerrilla warfare and assaults on northern units and towns. Jesse James and the units would then plunder these towns. One of Jesse James' notable crimes before becoming an outlaw was on September 27, 1864, in Missouri Centralia, 46 hours from where Jesse James was originally from. The Bushwhackers, under the command of William T. Anderson, also known as Bloody Bill, would stop a train outside Centralia, Missouri. On this train would be Union soldiers who were not armed. The Bushwhackers would try to switch the tide of the war and kill 22 unarmed Union soldiers. Sergeant Thomas would be the only survivor during this incident, and after the massacre, they would later light the train tracks on fire. This enraged the Union forces on the cruelty of the killing of their soldiers and wanted revenge for their slain brothers, and would pursue the Bushwhackers. The Union underestimated the Bushwhackers' 80 soldiers and sent an army of more than 150 soldiers who were inexperienced and lacked equipment. The inexperienced Union forces was met with sounds of gunfire and bullets coming from their rifles. People collapsing off their horses, dead bodies everywhere. Some of the Union soldiers were able to protect themselves with revolvers and were able to kill 7 of the Bushwhacker soldiers and injuring 10 of them, including Jesse James, who was shot in the chest but was later recovered by his cousin. The Bushwhackers, being experienced, organized, and heavily armed, were able to kill more than 100 Union soldiers. This became a losing battle for the Union soldiers and became another humiliating loss for the Union, especially from an army that was much smaller than them. During a skirmish in Albany, Missouri, the commander William T. Anderson was killed, and after 6 months, the Civil War came to an end. The Confederates surrendered to the North and the death of their commander, William T. Anderson. They would avenge their late commander and their Southern pride. This marked the beginning of the tale of the James Younger Gang. A few months after the war ended, former Bushwhackers had established a gang that would rob banks, and it wasn't until early February 1866 that the James Gang, with the help of the Archie Gang, a prominent guerrilla Confederate group, would commit their first robbery at Clay County Savings Bank in Liberty, Missouri. They would steal $62,000. This would be the first ever daytime robbery of any U.S. bank after the Civil War came to an end. Not much long after, on October 30th, would be the first time the James Gang alone would rob a bank. The members of the James Younger Gang robbed the Alexander Mitchell & Co. Bank in Lexington, Missouri, getting away with $2,000. Because of the publicity Jesse James for his crimes, a former Confederate wrote an article praising Jesse James. This article would instill Southern pride against the Northern, even after the war. Between the years of 1867 and 1873, the James Gang stole $214,000, which is the equivalent of $5 million in today's time. The crimes committed between those years were money stolen from a judge and robberies from a saving bank in Missouri. During one of the robberies, Jesse mistakenly killed John Sketches, who he thought was the man who killed his late commander, William T. Anderson, during the Civil War. A year later, he would rob a stagecoach near Hot Springs, Arkansas. They stole jewelry, money, and anything they thought was worth value. The robbery of the stagecoach was infamous and brought attention of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. The Pinkerton Detective Agency was a famous detective agency that served as President Abraham Lincoln's Secret Service. The Pinkerton Detective Agency would then locate Jesse James' stepfather's house where they thought he was living. In an attempt to get Jesse James out, they threw a smoke bomb into the chimney and exploded, which led to the death of Jesse James' 7-month-old half-brother and caused his mother to lose her arm in the process. Later, Pinkerton agency found out Jesse James was not in their house, but instead robbing the Missouri Pacific Railroad train in Rocky Cut, Missouri. The brothers hopped on the train and got away with $15,000. It would take 2 months where their luck would finally run out. It was Northfield, Minnesota, 2 p.m., September 7th, 1876. The First National Bank was seized by 8 members of the James Younger Gang. The James Younger Gang demanded the safes to be opened, but the bankers were not able to open the safe because the locks were only worked at certain times. During the confrontation, citizens around bravely armed themselves and prepared for a shootout. The shootout was a swift battle and a major loss to the James Younger Gang. The loss of 7 members and a few injured and a few escaping with their horses. After the incident, the Kansas City Journal commences and says, one of their newspapers wrote, "There is no longer a question as to there being a perpetrators of all the bold open daylight bank and day and night train robberies of the past 10 years, not only in Missouri, but in Illinois, Kentucky, West Virginia, Iowa, and Kansas." The newspaper also clarifies the fellow James gang members and how they thought of themselves. They were no common thieves or vulgar robbers, but had ambition to make themselves famous in, as they termed it, a fair, square, and honorable way of doing such things. Between the years of 1879 and 1881, Jesse James would recruit new bandits and rob 3 trains. They robbed the Chicago Alton and St. Louis train, Stagecoach Mammoth Cave, and Kentucky. Their last train they robbed was a Chicago Alto train. Between those years, Jesse James and the new recruits accumulated $16,800. The public were still surprised once again that Jesse James was still committing these crimes, and a bounty was now put on him for $10,000, dead or alive. With a constant flow of recruits and more money, Jesse James and the new recruits stayed in a rented cabin under his alias Tom Howard. On April 3rd, 1882, at 8:27 a.m., a fellow member, Charles Ford, and his brother, Bob Ford, were planning another robbery when Jesse noticed a portrait out of place. Getting up to go fix the portrait, he leaves his guns on the tables, and the Ford brothers, taking the chance, shoot Jesse James in the back of the head, killing him and putting the end to the mythical so-called Robin Hood of the South.
When you look at Jesse James's life, Jesse James's whole life was based on the American frontier. The American frontier was a period of massive migration and the idea of manifest destiny. During the lifetime of Jesse James, he would commit crimes all throughout the nation and the frontier. The American frontier was also a time when cowboys were glorified by the common folk. Cowboys were seen as heroes by God whose hearts are full of justice. Even when cowboys would die, folklore and stories of them making tribute to the cowboys. Later movies and magazines then glamorized the cowboys. Even is there an action where righteous or would not, people would still be later be inspired by their action. This would also start the myth about Jesse James being Robin Hood down the South. Jesse James was your ideal cowboy during this period. Jesse James is known for which makes him important for paving the way of folklore during this period and one of the faces of the American frontier.